Our guest is veteran musician, author, journalist, actor, and as we're about to find out, prolific dreamer, Elliott Murphy, who has released a new book titled Elliott Murphy's Rock Dreams. Elliott, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Eric. Good to be here. Great to do something on a Sunday.
Yes, on a Sunday. This is great. I rarely do Sunday interviews, so it's nice to be doing this. Elliott, what a story! I was telling you before we started recording. I try to keep these to about an hour or so. You got so much that I want to ask you about. What a career! Let's just start where you were born here on the East Coast, where I'm from. Right now, you are in
Right
Paris.
now, I'm in Paris, France, where I've
Yeah.
lived for the last 35 years. I was born on Long Island. It's funny because I was born, the hospital was actually in a place called Rockville Center. And whenever I show the French, say I was born in Rockville, they just can't believe it that a rock musician was born in a place called City of Rock. And I grew up in Garden City, Long Island, is where Charles Lindbergh took off from to fly to Paris on that solo voyage. And yeah, then I lived in Manhattan for a while, but I've been in Paris for 35 years.
You were born to a show business family. I see on your website.
I was. My father, I'm actually a junior. Elliott James Murphy Jr. And my father, he had a show called The Aqua Show, which is what I named my first album after. It was kind of a spectacular water show on the site of the 1939 World's Fair. And they had some big orchestras there. Duke Ellington played there, Cab Calloway, some famous comedians, and 8,000 people could get in there. And so I do come, I know about show business and how much luck plays a part in it. My father used to always tell me, he said, no matter how good the show was, if it was raining, nobody came. And when you've played as many outdoor festivals as I have, and quite a few get rained on in the summer, you realize how true that is.
Yeah, talent isn't just what it's about. It's time. It's right place, right time.
A lot of it, it's interesting. When I thought we had some time for this interview, I was responding to an interview I have to do for a South African writer, and he was talking about an album of the Velvet Underground that I wrote the liner notes for. It's called Live 1969, and that was just again a question of timing, being in the right place, knowing this person, boom, and doing that, and then getting to meet Lou Reed. But I'm jumping ahead a little bit.
Yeah. Well, let's go back a little bit. This is according to Wikipedia. So you tell me what's correct. Your band, the Rapscallions, won the 1966 New York State Battle of the Bands.
Correct.
Okay. 1971, you traveled to Europe, appeared in the Federico Fellini film Roma.
Correct again.
Okay. Returning to New York in 1973, secured a record contract with Polydor Records after being noticed by rock critic Paul Nelson.
Hmm.
Okay. In 1988, returned to college studies he had given up in the 1960s and completed his bachelor's degree at Empire State College. So far, so good.
So far, so good. A
Okay.
footnote. Paul Nelson was the one who he actually worked for Mercury, and he was the one that was putting together that Velvet Underground album and
Okay.
asked me to do the liner notes.
All right. And the debut album, Aqua Show, 1973, critically acclaimed and favorably reviewed in Rolling Stone, Newsweek, and New Yorker. So the debut album, Aqua Show, reviewed along with Bruce Springsteen's The Wild, The Innocent, and the E Street Shuffle in Rolling Stone under the headline, quote, he's the best Dylan since 1968, which earned you and Bruce the, quote, new Dylan tag. How did that feel at the time to be compared to Bob Dylan? Did you feel elated? Did you feel under pressure? Did you feel both?
Well, I felt a tremendous amount of pressure. I wasn't really expecting it. I never thought I sounded too much like Bob Dylan. All those new Dylans, if you look at them back now, Bruce, myself, Loudon Wainwright, John Prine, even Tom Petty, none of us really sound like each other. And none of us really sound too much like Bob Dylan. But the difficult thing, Eric, was that was my first album. And they were comparing it to Blonde on Blonde, which was Bob Dylan's fifth
Oh,
or sixth album.
yeah.
The question is, where do you go from there? What do I do now? Maybe I should just stop now. But and there's always been a mystery about that headline. He's the best Dylan since 1968. Was it about me? Was it about Bruce? Was it about both of us? But I mean, in a way, it was a very good thing because it really, I was not a big signing to Polydor Records. It was really just I was a favorite project of Peter Siegel, who was the head of A&R at the time. It was a small deal, a minuscule advance. But when this really tidal wave of press followed that album, Polydor had to pay attention and really started putting some money into the album and launched a tremendous promotional campaign, which included posters in the New York subway and a lot of things. So it was really because of all that press was generated just on the strength of the album. It wasn't the record company that did that. And they were then trying to play catch up after that album came out.
You talk about not sounding like Dylan. Who were the artists that influenced you in your sound, do you think?
Well, I was in 1971, as you mentioned, I took a trip to Europe and I was kind of before that, I was in Long Island kind of bands. I was playing, hard rock. I was playing the Stooges. I was playing the Who. I was playing the MC5. But when I went to Europe, something happened. There was a sea change in my musical direction, and I was singing on the streets, and I was singing Leonard Cohen, and I was singing Paul Simon, and I guess and Lou Reed a little bit, and of course Bob Dylan. And I guess I got away from wanting to be a guitar hero to concentrating on the incredible singer-songwriters who were around at the time, and that really became my focus.
What's your songwriting process? How does songs start for you? I always ask this to musicians because I'm fascinated with it. What's the part that seems to come easiest for you? What's the biggest challenge for you as a songwriter?
I would say it's been about over 50 years I've been doing this, so I must have written 500 songs at least, but the process has changed over time. In the early days, I was blessed with this kind of organic inspiration. Music and words would come together. Some of my, now most classic songs were written in a very short amount of time. Last of the Rock Stars, I think I wrote it in a hotel room in Switzerland one night in 1971. So it came very quickly. Uh, Now I'd say I get ideas, I get a chorus, I get a verse, and then they got to live inside me for a while. But it can take even a couple of years for those songs to come to fruition. But the main thing is that the story you want to tell in the song.
How autobiographical are your lyrics?
Uh, I would say they run the gamut. I mean, there's a song called On Elvis Presley's Birthday, which actually began as a poem, one of the few songs of mine that began that way. And that's about a day I passed with my father. And it was Elvis Presley's birthday. We heard it on the radio. This was in the 60s. So that was completely autobiographical. Other songs, there's a song called Three Complete American Novels. It's really three fictional stories, but I think I always wanted to tell my story in the music. I think that's why I got into it. That's what attracted me. I didn't necessarily want to write hit songs or write love songs or, I wanted to tell a story that was close to me, even if it was fictional.
Your albums Lost Generation, Night Lights, and Just a Story from America from 75, 76, and 77 were produced by Doors producer Paul Rothchild. What was that experience like recording music with Paul Rothchild?
Well, my second album, Lost Generation, which Paul produced, it was originally going to be produced by Lou Reed because Lou had brought me to RCA Records. It started coming to my after I wrote those liner notes for the Velvets, we became kind of friendly. Started coming to my shows at Max's Kansas City. It was a club in New York, and then Lou got arrested for something. I think it was bad, phony prescriptions in a drugstore. And I had to find another way to do this. And Paul Rothchild, I knew him as the Doors producer. He had also produced one of my all-time favorite albums, which was the first Paul Butterfield Blues album.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, with the one with Mike Bloomfield, Born in
Yeah.
Chicago, because he was kind of the Elektra staff producer. So I knew the name right away, and I knew him from Janis Joplin. But you got to remember, at that time, the Doors were not they were kind of out of fashion in their early 70s. It wasn't really until the movie came out and things. So Paul he was hustling for gigs that he had tried with Bonnie Raitt. almost had a hit with her cover of Runaway. So he was anxious to do this project, and he brought me to LA. I didn't have a band because the first thing Polydor did when they signed me is broke up my band. They just wanted to sign me and my brother. But he put together this kind of all-star band, which and I contributed some of the elements. He said, "Who's your favorite drummer?" And I said, "Jim Gordon, who had played with Jericho
Oh,
and the Dominoes
yes.
and had co-written Layla with Eric Clapton, and who had just a tragic ending of schizophrenia, uh, murdered his mother, spent the rest of his life in a psychiatric hospital. And if you ever met him, he was such a sweet guy. It's just tragic to even
Wow.
think.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, Elliot, I had the author of the book on Jim, and it's a fascinating read, and it's a Joel Selvin was the is the
Yeah, I want to
author.
read that book. I've heard
Oh,
of.
it has a lot of empathy for Jim. It's
Mm,
it's about how just what you were saying, his struggles and how the system really let him down. They put him in prison, but needed he needed some serious psychological assistance, people that would actually care about him rather than just throw him in a prison.
yeah,
Yeah, that Joel Selvin wrote the book, and I just got to find the title here, but a fascinating read. So yeah, tell me, Jim. So they say he was a sweet guy, but
he
his
was real, and
demons
he was
took
just
over.
an unbelievably great musician. I mean,
Amazing.
he was one of those drummers. He could just create the swing and the groove to the song, and then everyone kind of hooked on to that. So we also brought in Richard T., who was Paul Simon's piano player. Uh, Paul Rothschild was trying to get a deal for these musicians from New Orleans who he'd brought to LA, including Sonny Landreth, the great Sonny Landreth. So he played a little on the album, and I played guitar too. So that he put together this kind of all-star band there, and we recorded at Electra Studios. And after the sessions were over, sometimes he'd drag out some of the Doors tapes, rare and unreleased stuff from the vaults there, and play it for me. That was really fascinating, and tell me stories about Jim Morrison, how Jim Morrison lived in a motel and didn't have a phone in his room, and whenever they wanted to get him, they'd have to call the office of the motel, and
Yeah,
someone would have to knock on his door. Anyway, I was staying at the Beverly Hills Hotel, which was a far cry from that. So that was a great experience with Paul. The problem was that album, Lost Generation, the head of A&R at RCA was a guy called Mike Berniker, who was again a great producer, arranger, musician, but he was not into rock and roll. He had produced Barbra Streisand, People, and he looked upon me as a solo singer, artist, and he could, it was very hard for him to understand how a rock album should have sound. So we had to remix a lot of that album to please him, change the order. He insisted we start the album with a ballad, which we did. I don't think it was the best song on the album. But again, the album came out, got great reviews. And what I didn't know then, and which I knew now, those albums were doing very well in Europe. Uh, with Aqua Show Lost Generation. I came back to New York and did my next album with RCA with Steve Katz, who was in the Blues Project, and he was really the one who gave Lou Reed his second life in his career because he put together the Rock and Roll Animal live album of Lou, uh, which when Lou put out Berlin, it was a tremendous, colossal failure at the time. And Steve put together this great band of Steve Hunter and other musicians. And anyway, so I worked with Steve Katz. We recorded at Electric Ladyland. Uh, Patti Smith was recording her first album in the Studio A, and I was in Studio B. I recorded much of that album with a couple of members of the Modern Lovers, Jerry Harrison and Ernie Brooks. Jerry went on to join the Talking Heads, of course. And again, I think if you look at the sales in terms of what albums sell today, they probably did pretty well. But back in those days, the market was exploding. And then from my fourth and kind of last major label album, I went to London and worked with a famous engineer who was trying to become a producer named Robin Cable. He had worked a lot with Elton John, with Carly Simon. He was part of the Trident Sound. And again, I had an amazing drummer on that album, Phil Collins.
Yeah. He plays on every
So
track, doesn't he? He's on all of them.
he's on every track, I think,
Yeah. Oh, except for one.
except for one. He had another gig. But it was interesting because I got to know, and Phil was such a great guy, so funny. Just he almost he kept the everyone laughing all the time in the studio. And Genesis, Peter Gabriel had just left Genesis.
Right. Around 77 is
Yeah,
around the year,
around
right?
that.
Okay.
And so I said to Phil, I said, "What are you going to do now with Genesis?" And he had some side projects he was working on. And he said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "We have auditioned so many singers." He said, I'm thinking I might even sing myself." And that's exactly what he did. So that
Oh
album
man.
came out, Just a Story from America. That was on Columbia. And that album had a lot to do with why I'm speaking to you from Paris today, because there was a song on that album called Anastasia, which was kind of a hit in France. Again, I didn't really know it, although Columbia did send me to Paris to do a lot of press and interviews. And that album and that song kind of set the stage and gave me enough enough credence here in France that I could move here and continue my career here, which I did in 1989.
Lou Reed, I'm sure there are a lot of Lou Reed fans listening right now. What was Lou like? What was your relationship like with Lou? Is he misunderstood? I mean, he was always an enigma to many, especially the media. He wasn't one. He certainly wasn't one to open up. I think the music was his priority. He wasn't interested in being a famous rock star. I don't think.
I think he was very interested in being a famous rock
Oh,
star.
really? Okay.
Oh, very interested in that. Lou was into Lou. And first time I met Lou, I went to a Mitch Ryder concert at the Cafe A Go-Go in New York. And this was before I had ever recorded a note of music. And Mitch had covered Rock and Roll, the Velvet Underground song that Lou had written. And I was with someone who knew Lou. And I remember Lou was he had retreated. He had quit the Velvet Underground. Went back to Long Island and he was working, I think, in his father's company. And he was wearing a Mickey Mouse t-shirt. I always remember that. And this person, Danny Fields, who's a legendary scene maker in New York, he introduced us. And I said, "Oh, all I could think of saying was, you're from Long Island? I'm from Long Island." And he said, "Yes, I'm from Long Island." Lou was mercurial. I can say that. That's kind of a kind way. He loved to torture the press, but he loved doing interviews and he loved people asking him questions. He he was very important in the early days of my career because he gave some interviews and really talked about Aqua Show, loved the lyrics. Uh, and he brought me to RCA Records because he was on RCA at the time. So we had a period there and he also brought me to Dennis Katz, who was my manager and Lou's manager for a while. But for instance, he had just recorded Sally Can't Dance, his album. In
Wow.
later years, he totally disowned that album. But I'll tell you, swear, he took me into the studio to listen to the final mixes and he loved that album, just loved it. So Lewis could be the sweetest, nicest guy in the world, and then his demons took over,
Mm.
and he was not that. But I will say this about Lou. He was always into the music. I mean, he was always doing something, even when he made Metal Machine music, which I did a long interview with him for a music magazine called Circus at the time. He was into it. He was into it, but he was a very mercurial character, Lou.
I was fascinated with comments he made. I don't remember where. It was a documentary on him, maybe, but his fascination with sounds and how you can create music out of sounds. Sounds are everywhere; they're all around us, and he just loved it. Just that whole process of creating music. And Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones played guitar, I think, on the track "Rock Ballad."
Exactly.
Right. Okay, and I think if I recall correctly, too, I watched an interview with you where you said Mick almost produced an album of yours, or am I getting that right?
No, I asked Mick Jagger to produce an
Mick
album.
Jagger. Okay.
Yeah, the other Mick. And
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. No, Mick Taylor had just left the Rolling Stones and he was signed to Columbia as I was, and I went to the Columbia in the CBS Records International Convention in London, and I met him and asked him if he would play in my album. Although I didn't really have a song, excuse me, that would be good for him. And he said he would, and I really wrote Rock Ballad for him to play on. And I remember he carried his own amp into the studio. He had an amp because Keith had given him this amp. It was a Music Man or some bizarre mark, and he came because he liked to play in that amp, but he didn't bring a guitar. He played my guitar, my 1961 Strat on that cover. Mick Jagger was, I asked Mick to produce my second album. I asked a lot of people to produce my second album. I asked David Bowie to produce it. I met with David. He was such an English gentleman. I mean, he was really wonderful. Although he did give me my first line of cocaine, and I could have done without that.
Oh,
Yeah, he was great. I was all of a sudden I went from the before Aqua Show was released, I was totally anonymous. I was a nobody, I was just a kid from Long Island who had gone to Europe and kind of reinvented himself. But once that album hit, I wanted to be in that club and I wanted to be able to meet all those people who were my heroes. David Bowie's Changes album had influenced Aqua Show a lot as well.
another fellow Long Island native, Billy Joel, and he played piano on the track Deco Dance from, I think, 76's Nightlights.
Nightlights, he did,
Yeah.
yeah.
How long before that did you know Billy? Did you run in the same circles? Had you run into him years before?
My story with Billy goes way back and continues to this day. Uh, Billy was a pretty well-known Long Island musician, Nassau County, in his early days because he was so incredibly talented. There was a band called the Hassles, and he was the organ player and the singer. And I remember going to see them on a snowy day in 1966 or 67, and he did a version of "Give Me Some Lovin'," and you would have swore, Stevie Winwood was in the room. So, and then when I got to know Billy when I was on Columbia, he was on Columbia. I opened a lot of shows for Billy back in the day, in Allentown, where he had a hit song called Allentown at the time. I was married at the time, and we were friends with him and his wife, who he was married to at the time. It was his manager. He was married to his manager. Big mistake, I think. And then I didn't see Billy for a long time when I moved to Europe, and then we kind of reconnected together again. I found a picture of him and I with Dr. John, and I managed to get that picture, that photo to him, and then we reconnected. And then a couple of years ago, I was inducted into the Long Island Music Hall of Fame, and Billy did the induction. He gave the speech, which was just wonderful. And then a few days later, he invited me to come on stage with him at Madison Square Garden, and I sang "Walk on the Wild Side" by Lou Reed, another Long Island native.
Liberty DeVito was on this podcast, and I was really happy to see that those two guys were able to rekindle their friendship. And seems like everything's cool with them now. Liberty's a great guy, and Billy seems like a great guy too.
Billy is just, it's overwhelming. I mean, he could really be a classical pianist. I mean, he denies it, but I think he could. And he was one of those guys, he could just hear a song and he could play it, immediately. He was brilliant.
What did you think of
Still,
the song he put out recently? I thought was amazing. His new song.
well, all the cats like that I'm friends with, be it Billy or Bruce Springsteen or even the Rolling Stones, not that I'm friends with them, but anything they do, I like.
Yeah.
It's just part of their story. I don't really judge it. I think and I've been humbled that many albums which I didn't like, I ended up loving. Exile on Main Street, did not like that album when it first came out, and now it's one of my favorite albums of all times.
Isn't that interesting? That happens with me too. Albums that I didn't like then. Now, as you get older,
Yeah,
something clicks. Yeah.
yeah. And I was just listening to some of Bruce's later albums, Working on a Dream,
Oh,
which I remember,
Magic.
and Magic, and I love those albums now. They all got some brilliant songs on them. And so, although music has many elements like international, like professional sports now. I mean, big concerts are held in sports arena. I don't think it should be a competitive endeavor, you know. They started rating albums on Rolling Stone. Remember when they did that with the star system? And that's when Paul Nelson quit as the review editor of Rolling Stone because he didn't believe that was the way we should look at art as well.
I'm with you. You said Bruce. We're talking about Bruce Springsteen. He sings. He worked with you. He sings on 1995's "Everything I Do Leads Me Back to You" from your album "Selling the Gold." How did that collaboration come to be? How long ago had you met Bruce? Back? Did you meet him at the time that Rolling Stone headline was out?
I met him at the time before that. He was playing an early show at Max's Kansas City. Maybe he was opening for the Wailers or they were opening for him. And Paul Nelson, who I've mentioned before, he brought me to the show. And I'll tell you, Eric, there were 20 people in the audience, but Bruce performed as if there was 20,000. And I met him afterwards, and he was, you know, we kind of something clicked right away. And then when Aqua came out, and there were all those comparisons, you know, we were all in that new Bob Dylan club together. Uh, we pretty much been close ever since. You know, I consider Bruce a great friend. Not that I see him that much. He lives in New Jersey, and I live in Paris, but he's invited me on stage with him many times. You know, all over Europe. He sang and on Selling the Gold. I had this song, Everything I Do Leads Me Back to You, which I really thought Bruce could sing on. And I went to see him in New Jersey to play him the tape, see if he'd agree to do it. I'll never forget, it was like a rainy winter night in New Jersey, and I had a DAT tape. I don't know if you remember those.
Oh,
Those
I
are
sure do. Yeah.
digital little cassettes, and Bruce had a DAT player in his car. So we had to go out into his car in the rain and play that song. It was like being in a Bruce Springsteen song, you know, right?
Yeah.
And he listened to it and he said, "Yeah, I could sing on that." So, you know, all the tapes were sent to him from Belgium, where I was recording, to New Jersey. And a couple of months passed and I didn't hear anything. And I figured, well, maybe he got too busy. And then one night, it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the phone rang, and it was Bruce. He said, "Elliot, I did it. I did it." And I said, "Whoa, do you know what time it is?" He said, "I only know what time it is in New Jersey." And he was originally gonna just sing on the choruses, but there's a verse in there which has a real automobile metaphor. I'm rolling on my rims. And he couldn't resist. And he sang that verse as well. And it was such a generous, you know, fellow part of the fellowship of We All Belong. Such a generous thing to do.
You said in one of the interviews I saw that it was just instant once, like Paris and you just seemed to be, it was like you were meant to be living there. What is it about Paris that you love?
Well, I think what I love about Paris and France and the French, they always looked at rock and roll and what I do, what we all do, as part of culture. In America, sometimes it's just looked upon as part of show business, a commodity. So there's many American and English artists who didn't have huge success in their homeland, who did find a public here, and I'm one of them. And when I came here in '79, Eric, to play my first show, I thought it was going to be in a little club of 50 people, and it was there was 1,000 people in the audience, and I did 6 encores, and I didn't want to leave that
Wow.
stage. And I thought my career was over by that time because I had been left Columbia Records and I was really struggling in America, really struggling. I was broke. And 1977, I always thought was a horrible year for rock and roll. Many would disagree with me, but it was the be Elvis Presley died, first of all. Disco began and punk began. Nothing, I like a lot of punk music, a lot of punk bands, but the term singer-songwriter definitely became a dirty word. No one was interested in it, you know. And so I was really struggling in America. And when I came here and played that show, I said, wow, maybe there's a second act to be had. And so I started playing all over France. I started playing in Spain. And I played in Spain in 83, I think it was 82 was my first show. And Franco had died, the dictator, in 76, I think. And before that, there was no rock and roll in France. They wouldn't let Beatle record. I mean, in Spain, sorry. So now one of my greatest public is probably in Spain because I'm like the first generation of rockers to them. So in those 10 years, everything changed. And in 1989, I finally made the move and came to Paris. I've been here ever since.
That's great. Our guest is Elliott Murphy. He's released a new book titled Elliott Murphy's Rock Dreams. So I want to ask about the new book. Let's make the transition to your writing career. You're a published author, numerous collections of short stories, including the recently released Garden City Stories and 4 novels, the rock trilogy Marty May, Tramps and Diamonds by the Yard, and the neo-Western Poetic Justice. Your writing has appeared in Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, other publications. Your 1985 short story, The Lion Sleeps Tonight, was recently made into the feature film Broken Poet by acclaimed Spanish director Emilio J. Ruiz. When did you develop a passion for writing?
Well, let me start by saying my overused quotation, which I said once on a TV show. Literature is my religion and rock and roll is my addiction. I really need both of them. I started reading in a young age and I found great escape in, Jack Kerouac, John Steinbeck, and especially F. Scott Fitzgerald. And The Great Gatsby took place on Long Island, where I'm from. And at that time, it's hard to think of it now, but in the 60s, literature and music started coming together, There's some very literate singer-songwriters, such as Leonard Cohen, the greatest example, who also wrote a couple of novels. Uh, if you remember on the cover of Sergeant Pepper, all those faces there, I mean, I think the majority of them were writers, Edgar Allan Poe, Oscar Wilde. So it's always been important to me. I've always found inspiration in writing. It's a totally different process from writing songs and performing music. When you write a great paragraph, nobody applauds. And inspiration is important, but just sticking at it and editing is really important. So Marty May was really the first long form piece of writing I did. I wrote that as a part of it was published as a short story in Rolling Stone in 1980, which again, I was really kind of difficult time for me in America. And I ran into Jan Wenner, the publisher and owner of Rolling Stone on 57th Street and Fifth Avenue. And I knew him and he asked me what I was up to. And I said, well, I'm writing. And he said he wanted to read it. And he read it was called Cold and Electric, and he said, I'm going to publish it in Rolling Stone. And he actually edited it himself. And we talked today about cut and paste. He actually would cut with scissors and paste different things. I mean, that's where that term came from.
Yeah, old school. Yeah, I
Old
worked in the
school.
newspaper business when it was still the layout. You had the big boards
Yeah,
and you had to line each photo just so.
just so. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was a great experience. And then I expanded the book into what became Marty May, and Jan Wenner and Rolling Stone tried to get a publisher in America, but the attitude among publishers was, people who are interested in rock and roll don't read books. Nothing could be further from the truth
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, this whole podcast is all about books on rock and roll. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think we've
Well, I
proven
think
them
that
wrong.
that changed when some rock memoirs and of great musicians became so successful, from Keith Richards to Bruce Springsteen to Patti Smith. And now there's a deluge of them,
Yeah.
I've written my own memoir, Just a Story from America. So I did find a publisher in France who contacted me and wanted to publish it. So that was published in France first as a short version called Cold and Electric, and then as the full novel as Marty May some years later. So, I like to write. I still do. I need the solitude. I think it's a great form of therapy.
I agree. I agree. Bruce is a great writer too. With the book he wrote, I'm not surprised lyrically how amazing he is, but reading his book, the way he puts
Bruce
together a
is a great
story.
writer and he's
Yeah.
a great reader too. He reads a lot. He's taught me about some writers I would. Carson McCullum, I think he was really into her. Uh, He gave me Woody Guthrie's biography, gave me the actual paperback copy, and yeah, Bruce, he's what the water, the Springsteen waters run deep. Let me tell you that.
I was just saying this to a guest recently. It seems like the best lyricists are prolific readers.
I think it makes sense. Although lyrics barely stand up on a piece of paper by themselves, it's really the music that gives them the wings and the emotional gravity. Uh, but everyone I know, Lou was a great reader. He loved Delmore Schwartz, who was a poet, and was a teacher of his up at Syracuse. My friend Garland Jeffries turned me on to some of James Baldwin's books. So, I think I think it goes hand in hand. I think everybody I know who writes good rock lyrics, we like films and we like books.
So this book, Elliott Murphy's Rock Dreams, what a great idea for a book. I suppose we should credit your fans for this.
That's pretty much it, Eric. What happened was I've often dreamed about other musicians and rock stars. Just I don't know why they're living there in my subconscious, I guess. But I never really started writing them down. And then a couple of years ago, because as you know, as everybody knows, if you don't write down your dreams, they disappear right away.
Mm-hmm.
Within seconds, it's like smoke in the air, it's gone. And so I started writing them down and then I started posting them on Facebook. And the reaction among the fans was tremendous. And they really pushed me to put this together as a book. So now I think it's the perfect kind of book to have on your bedside table there. Read a dream before you go to sleep. I wrote about 150 of them there, full of
Yeah.
all these real characters, although in my dreams, it's nothing to do with their truth, but everyone from Debbie Harry to Mick Jagger to Keith Richards to Lou Reed. Who else is in there? Gosh,
Oh, there's so many.
there's
Steven
so
Tyler
many.
makes an appearance. I'm going to ask you about a few of them that show up in
Yeah.
there. What I'm going to let's play amateur. We're going to play amateur psychologist. There's much written about and documented about dreams and what they really mean. Where do you think dreams come from? This is deep. We're getting
Well,
deep here.
we're getting deep, but I think, I think dreams are sometimes a way we unentangle our lives. And I know in my case, I think my a lot of my hopes and dreams, a lot of my hopes in my own career are in my dreams. I'm on stage with a lot of very famous people in those dreams. And that's the club I always wanted to be a member of. So they inhabit my dreams.
I want to pick out a few favorite dreams from the book. Let's start with, well, this is the very first one. You had a dream you were a member of the Beatles, and this reminds me of a dream where you're running still. It's like you're not getting anywhere. It's kind of like that. You're supposed to be writing songs with these guys,
Yeah.
but nothing's happening.
I've had so many dreams where I'm on stage and I can't find my guitar, or I'm on stage and I don't know what song I'm supposed to play, or on stage and I'm undressed.
That's the famous one. I
That's
know
the
I'm
thing.
not wearing anything.
And I think, my wife is an actress and actors have the same kind of dreams. They often have dreams of being on stage and forgetting their lines or forgetting what play they're in. So better there than in real life.
Yeah.
The only
Yeah.
time I ever came close to that was Bruce invited me once on stage and in Paris to sing with him. And I said, "What we're we going to sing?" And he said, "Oh, let's do Born to Run." And that is a very complicated song. And I really had to, so I knew most of it. And but that whole middle section, da 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 da. Whew.
Yeah.
So then I came back the next night, and the day after, I really rehearsed that song. And when I was on stage with him the next night doing it, and I got it. And after the show, Steve Van Zandt said to me, "You practiced."
That's great. Yeah, I'm
So,
actually, there's a book on Stevie Van Zandt that just came out. I'm going to have the author on soon. I'm really looking forward to that because Stevie's he's a great musician and a lover of all things rock and roll.
Oh, and I think he has just an encyclopedic knowledge of
Yeah,
music, and I mean, he has dedicated his life to this music we all love.
absolutely. Yeah, last night I dreamed I was a member of the Beatles and we were all together rehearsing in a suburban house on Long Island. And I was pissed off because we were supposed to be writing songs and nothing was happening. And John was fooling around all the time. But Paul was surprised at my impatience and said, "Be cool. We'll come up with something." I love it. All
And
right.
that's, that was the first one I wrote down. It was
Yeah.
short.
Yeah.
Then as I got in the habit of doing this, I could remember more and they get expanded.
I
But
noticed that. Yeah, they do. They expand and
but that
they,
one was very short and sweet, and I just thought that was so ironic, typical of the Beatles. I mean, if you've seen that marvelous documentary, about them, Let It Be, or
oh,
when they're
yes,
in the studio and you see how they came up with songs, and they came in there with nothing, and they came out with just some of the most well-known songs to this day.
unreal. All right, this one from you that has Steven Tyler from Aerosmith in it. Very interesting. Rock Dream number 9. Steven Tyler, guitar salesman extraordinaire. What happens in this dream? And why do you think it's Steven Tyler who appears and as a guitar salesman? What do you make of this?
Well, I knew Steven because he was managed by the same managers as me. They were a company
Okay.
called Lieber and Krebs, so I got to know Aerosmith. I opened a few shows for Aerosmith
Did you? Okay.
back in the early days. I I was playing a series of concerts at a place in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's called the Performance Center. I was playing 3 nights there, or 4 nights. Supposed to be opening for the New York Dolls, but the first night the Dolls missed the plane. And so quickly Aerosmith came in. So I got to know them, and I know Steven a little bit, and uh, he was there. Bruce invited me to a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame dinner, and we're sitting next to Steven. But Steven is a great salesman. I will tell you that of his own music, and he's got the gift of gab, and he's just an extraordinary personality. And so I'm not, if you ever been into a guitar store and you walk out buying something, it's like so. And Aerosmith was always into the gear. They were always into the guitars. They always had Joe Perry had great guitars. He still has great guitars to these days. The same night I played with Billy Joel, he came up and did Walk This Way, and he had this backwards half left-handed Stratocaster. And but Steven Tyler is one of the most colorful personalities in modern rock and roll that I ever met.
Yeah, nobody like him before, since, or nobody ever will be.
I was
He's a great
so
character.
sorry to hear he had some vocal problems,
I
and they
know. Yeah.
gotta call it quits.
Yeah, great voice. Last night I dreamed I was with my longtime guitarist Olivier. Is it Olivier? How do you pronounce?
Durand,
Yeah,
yeah.
Olivier Duran, and we were thinking about changing to smaller guitars so we would appear bigger on stage. And Steven Tyler of Aerosmith was a very dynamic guitar salesman. Had been showing me a small white electric guitar, like a Fender Mustang, which is a three quarter size guitar, and saying that it looked very cool on me. And the next thing I knew, I was in the basement restaurant of the theater I was going to play later that evening with Joss, my French agent, and was planning on singing some songs before my show, accompanied only by a pianist. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Dream, it's interesting about dreams. They're often in two parts. There's often an early part and then there's the section part, and they can take place in two
Yeah, you're
different,
right, huh? Yeah.
and with a different cast of characters. But I have noticed that since I started paying attention to my dreams, they can often be separated into two parts.
Yeah. Aerosmith, the story is they first played Dream On live in Connecticut, here where I am, at the Shabu Inn in Willimantic, Connecticut. Did you ever play any shows in Connecticut?
I played a lot of
A
shows in
lot of them.
Connecticut.
Okay. Toad's
Uh,
Place, New
Post
Haven.
Place.
Okay.
I did a number of times. I think I opened for in Hartford for maybe for ELO, if that sounds
All
right.
right. That might have been what, the Harvard Civic Center, maybe.
Might have been, yeah. I mean, there was a period I was opening for open for the Kinks and ELO, Hall and Oates, a lot of other bands. Bruce
Yeah.
and I were once comparing notes as to who we had opened for, and he had opened for Black Oak, Arkansas
Oh, yeah.
back in the day. So yeah, but I played all over the East Coast, I think.
Rock Dream number 20, Clive Davis, Jerry Garcia, and Dancing with Cher. What's this dream about? Please tell us.
Clive Davis, the legendary music executive, it was always my dream to be signed by him to Columbia. And he wrote me a very nice letter once, also talking about the lack of singer-songwriters on the radio. But yeah, Jerry Garcia, the closest I came to meeting the West Coast music scene, I opened some shows for Jefferson Starship and many for Hot Tuna as
Great
well.
band.
But I never really met Jerry Garcia, but and Dancing with Cher, you tell me, I don't know where that.
Yeah, your dream. Let's see. It says last night I dreamed I was walking down Broadway with the legendary Clive Davis, U.S. record company exec who signed Dylan, Joplin, Springsteen to Columbia Records and later Whitney Houston to Arista Records, on our way to meet with the Grateful Dead, and asked them if they would record with me on my new album. This is good. The Dead own two tall buildings in San Francisco, and Clive told me they like to meet on a kind of platform that bridged the rooftops of both buildings. We went up there, but only Jerry Garcia was there. And the three of us sat down on steel folding chairs in the open air. And Clive asked Jerry if they wanted to do the project. And so Jerry yelled out, "Do you want to do it?" And hundreds of voices, all presumably members of the Dead, but unseen by me, started responding from the two buildings, all saying, "I don't know." Jerry looked at me and Clive and shrugged his shoulders.
I think that was probably some continuation of the incredible relation the Dead has always had with their fans, with the
Yeah,
Dead.
you're right. You're right.
And the Grateful Dead, it's such an oil and vinegar mix in the music business. They are so not what the music business
Yes.
would know what to do with. And it continues to this day. I mean, but it's great that they survive without really having any big hits for a
Right.
very
I
long
know.
time.
Yeah.
They never really you never heard the Dead on AM radio. I mean, back in the day, or hardly on FM radio. But I guess, and that's really myself. I always took my fans for granted in the early days. And then once you lose the support of the major labels, you really realize that's who keeps you going, your fans. And you got to give everything every show to keep them coming back. And in my case in particular, my European fans have just been marvelous. And I have some hardcore groups that used to come to 40 or 50 shows a year.
Wow. Yeah. Well, we mentioned Facebook too. It's a great way to keep in touch and communicate with your fans.
It is. Yeah. Everything, the internet, and Spotify and all that for an artist like me has been very helpful. I was able to break down the wall between me and my fans. Uh, Many of them I know by a first name basis. I release a lot of music on Spotify. I just released a new song a week ago called Night Surfing.
Okay. I'll put that
And
on the show notes that I make a playlist. So I'll include that
yeah.
in your playlist. Yep.
And so maybe that dream was reflecting, the bridge between the two buildings. And maybe that was the Grateful Dead between the
Right.
music, Clive representing the music business. I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, I want, I say my songs know more about me than I know about my songs. And the same goes for my dreams.
Yeah. And this is just what you said. It's like a two-parter. All of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm dancing with dancing the boogaloo with Cher in a Hollywood disco, and it was the '70s. Cher was very tan and dressed in designer white leather bell-bottom jeans with a matching midriff, bearing top and metallic bangles, and colored beads and long fringe were flying from her outfit as we danced to her '90s hit single "Do You Believe."
Hmm.
Yeah,
Which is a song I love, by the way.
great song.
My my taste can go run the gamut. And Cher's another one, she's when she started out with Sonny and Cher and I Got You, Babe, she was almost considered very counterculture, the two of them singing that song and the way they looked. And she is a great singer. On the other hand, there's a part of her that does very well in Las Vegas, always had done. Not to mention she's a great actress.
I was just about to say, yeah,
Yeah.
Mask. That song,
Yeah.
the movie Mask, she was amazing in.
Which
Amazing.
is Eastwick. Also, she was marvelous in that.
Yep.
And
Yes, you're right. All right, I'm going to give you my favorite rock dream. We'll finish with this one. This is dream number 107, my favorite hands down, and that's titled The Flying Stones. And somehow Columbo ends up in this along with Lou Reed. And the comment about Lipitor being a Greek god is priceless. Let's talk about this one. Do you remember this dream and what you thought when you woke up and you're like, what was that?
Give me
Let's
the
go.
first
Yeah,
couple of.
let's go to it here. This is 107. Let's see. We're going to 107. Flying Stones. Here we go. The last night I dreamed I was back in my hometown of Garden City, a middle class, leafy suburban village on Long Island, about 40 minutes from Manhattan. Once famous and now nearly forgotten novelist Thomas Wolfe said, "You can't go home again," but I certainly seem to do it in my dreams. And I was wearing my Garden City High School varsity jacket. The truth was, I lost interest in sports before I ever earned the right to wear one, although I did play lacrosse because had its roots in Native American culture. And I was standing on the corner of 7th Street and Franklin Ave, which was the epicenter of where us bored local teenagers would hang out because right on that corner was the only cool spot in that town, the Garden City Music Center, in all caps. Inside that temple of rock and roll, we could listen to 45 RPM records on headphones before we bought them. This is how I first heard Dion's Runaround Sue and Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues. I take guitar lessons from hungover jazz guitarists out of a real gig. And most importantly, it's where I bought my first guitar strap because playing standing up is the first step into show business. And well, before I go too deep into the black hole of my nostalgia, let me get on with my dream. Okay, so you're standing on the corner of 7th and Franklin. It's like a scene out of a George Lucas film, American Graffiti.
Yes.
And there were glorious, extravagant hot rods passing by in every direction, and sitting in the driver's seat of a chrome metal fake fuel injected beauty was the last of the movie stars, none other than Harrison Ford himself. So he's in the dream too. And he was stopped at the red light on 7th and Franklin when another hot rod with Beck's Bolero written on the side pulled up next to him. I knew that this must be the late guitar wizard Jeff Beck's car. And when the light turned green, they both burned rubber and sped off into the night. And I stood there lost in the existential suburban darkness, looking for salvation when the neon sign of the Garden City Music Center beckoned. And just as I was about to walk in and check out the Astronauts album, out came Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Ronnie Wood. I was stunned, unable to move. "You're the Rolling Stones," I said to Mick. "Not anymore." Mick replied, "Now we're the Flying Stones." Next thing I know, a red and white striped big top circus style tent floated down from the heavens and set up right in the middle of the street. And us Garden City teenagers filled the grandstands, and Mick, Keith, and Ronnie paraded out under the spotlight, now dressed as acrobats, and climbed their way to the top of the tent with a tight rope and trapeze lay waiting while we cheered wildly like we were at a rock concert. "You should join us," Keith yelled down to me. "This is where we put the roll into the rock." He chuckled as only Keith can, and I was sorely tempted to climb that ladder with him. "Come on up," said Ronnie Wood. "We could surely use a fourth set of hands." Ronnie looked a little nervous, and I noticed that Keith kept a cigarette in one hand, even when he was flying through the air. Keith always looking cool, even when he's flying through the air. "I think we forgot to set up the net," said Mick as he looked down. "Fuck the net," said Keith. "Never used one, never will." The crowd cheered as Keith chuckled. "No net? In that case, I don't think I'll be joining you guys," I said. "You're turning down a chance to be a member of the Stones," said Mick. This is like Mick Taylor all over again. "Well, Mick Taylor played on my album, Just a Story from America, because he left the Stones, so your loss was my gain." Honestly, I would join the Rolling Stones in a minute, but the Flying Stones is another story. Oh boy, there's something in here too. I think answers kind of the connection here. You mentioned about the Stones are so amazing. The Flying Stones they're death defying. Yeah. Oh, here it is. Yeah. Here, I think this we can get into a little psychology. The Flying Stones were about to begin their death defying act, and then in parentheses, kind of what they've been doing all these years, isn't it? But I certainly wasn't going to join and hope that Keith would catch me as I flew through the air, and he kept a cigarette in one hand. So I left and walked down the street. But I think that speaks to how amazing the Rolling Stones are. I mean, at their age now, 79, 80 years old, and they just put out an amazing album, and they're still out there touring. I mean,
First
what,
of all,
what
Eric, I
can't they
want to
do?
thank you for reading that. It's the first time I've had one of these dreams read back to
Right
me.
back to you.
You did such a great job.
Uh,
Well, let's say, first of all, it's not surprising. Keith Richards does know something about getting high, I guess. Uh,
That's the quote of the episode right there. Let's isolate that one.
and the Flying Stones. Yeah,
Oh,
it's one of my favorite dreams too. And the older you get, each time you get on stage, it's kind of like a death-defying, high-flying act. You want to get through that concert, get through this, keep your voice, remember the chords, play that guitar like you're still 16 years old. And so there's a lot of parallels there.
so Detective Columbo all of a sudden shows up. That's interesting. Says, "Hey, Mr. Murphy, can you help? Who's that? It's me, Detective Columbo. Can you help me solve this case?" Yeah, well, let's see. Who is he looking for? He was trying to. He was on some case here. Let's see. Oh, was he looking for Lou Reed? I think.
Ah,
Let me
not
see. Let
surprising.
me see. Lou Reed dropped down from heaven again. It says here too. What's Lou Reed doing in my dream? What is he? Oh, here we go. Columbo thumbed through a smudged little notebook with his penciled notes. I could see that. According to my notes, Lou Reed was from Freeport on the south shore of Long Island, so he's got a right. That's what the law says. Yeah, so I guess he's got a right to be in your dream.
Yes, Columbo he was giving out tickets for who should and should not be in my dreams. Yeah. But
These are great.
these characters, I mean, Columbo is such a great example. How many Columbo episodes did I watch in my life, Years of them. They must inhabit our subconscious somewhere.
Yep,
And you know, I think in many cultures the culture of the society is carried on in dreams, and dreams are given great importance. In Western society, not so much, there's the Freudian interpretation of dreams, but they're not considered part of the culture as they are in many primitive societies. And I think they're important. I think everybody should write down their dreams.
absolutely.
As Bob Dylan said, you can be in my dream if I can be in yours.
And we'll finish with a Lipitor comment because this is perfect. You right. I settled into the corner booth of the Spoon, which was a tiny luncheonette. At it. We hung out at as 1960s teenagers on Franklin Avenue. Lou, the Greek owner, made the best French fries and was always yelling at his kids to settle down or he'd throw us out. He came right over to my booth and put down a plate of fries and a bottle of ketchup. Things have changed, Lou, I said. Can't eat this stuff anymore. Why not? He seemed annoyed. High cholesterol. Doctor said I've got to get it down or I'm going on Lipitor. Who's Lipitor? A Greek god? Asked Lou.
Sounds like, huh?
That's how it ends. And that's
Yeah.
how we end this interview. What a way to end it.
Well,
Hey, any
thank
recent
you.
dreams any recent dreams that you can think of that you could add?
I posted a few since the book was published, but I have not been as conscientious about writing them down. God, I had one last night. What was I telling my wife this morning?
Yeah. All right. So you got to write it down.
I had a dream last night and I was somewhere and someone gave me a like an award and the award said, "You are now certified a legend."
Oh, nice.
And I was so happy in my dream. It's like I finally made it. I'm a legend. Okay. Now I'll tell you, then you know what they say, no man is a prophet in his own land, and with your wife it's even worse. So she certainly doesn't consider me a legend.
Well, I consider you a legend, and you have a lot of fans who consider you a legend. So,
Thank you, Eric.
Elliott Murphy's Rock Dreams. It's out now, and you can find it wherever books are sold. And where can people find you online? You mentioned Facebook website.
Instagram, we have a website, www.elliottmurphy.com, two L's, two T's in Elliott. And yeah, basically, and if people want to contact me, I basically get back to everybody.
Cool. Any shows coming up? Any live shows?
I got a live show in France next week, and then I go back to Spain. I got a live show in Barcelona. I hope to get back to America next year. Used to go there a lot, and when my son was going to school at SUNY Purchase, which is a school
Yeah.
in Westchester, but I hope to get back. And I hope to get to Nashville to record an album. That's kind of my dream to do before I hang up my Spurs.
Well, I'd love to see you if you come around here to the States. I'd love to catch you perform. That'd be great. Thanks, Elliot.
All right, Eric. In the words of Steven Tyler, dream on.